All right, everyone, come on in to All Things AuD. I'm Dr. Natalie Phillips.
I'm Dr. Hannah Galloway.
And Rebecca's microphone is off.
Okay, that probably is better. Here we go. Sorry. I'm button pushing over here. Well, yes, my name's Rebecca. I'm the 4th year resident working with these two. Dr. Natalie let me kind of take the reins. Well, not the reins, but the topic for this week. And it kind of came about because we, of course, do hearing aid fittings with a lot of different patient populations. And we had a patient come in that it was their first time in hearing aids and they've been wearing them and they're on the lowest experience level. So the least amount of gain that's appropriate for their prescriptive target. And everything is still just a little bit too loud. So in my limited training that I have in my brain, I thought, I wonder if we need to adjust kind of the MPOs or something else we could adjust. And so it got me thinking about uncomfortable loudness levels is what I learned them as, or loudness discomfort levels, LDLs or UCLs. And I kind of wanted to revisit them with this patient. And I'll talk a little bit more about what happened when we kind of put them into her programming. But that got me kind of wanting to discuss this topic because it's been a long time since, we've talked about it in my education. And I just like to glean from my audiologists here and see what you guys do with them. So let me just start by defining what they are. So an uncomfortable loudness level, or a UCL, it refers to the sound intensity at which a person finds uncomfortable. It's just essentially too loud or intolerable for them. And we measure it in dBHL when we're doing our testing.
Awesome. Okay. And so I think that you had looked up some research methods and do you want to share them about how we measure them and things that you have figured out? And then Dr. Galloway and I will talk about how we measure them.
Yeah. So when I first learned to do them, I learned to do them part as kind of pure tone testing. Typically after speech testing is done, instead of going for having them listen for really soft sounds and then blowing them out of the water, we kind of interrupt that process with the speech testing. So after they've done their word recognition, I was taught that now we can kind of go back to pure tones and get as many frequencies as possible, but really, present those beeps kind of at a very high level and then creep it up in an ascending way till it becomes kind of, their max limit. And then that's where we take that UCL. And I was kind of looking at other ways and some of the research behind it. And what I was looking is there's a variety of ways to do this. One of the older ways that have been done, it was the Cox contour test, which I haven't thought about since I was in classes. And that uses warbled tones and also uses maybe some of those spondy words. And the idea is that the subject has to kind of, describe through 1 through 7, is it comfortable or is it extremely loud? And so they kind of inch up the volume essentially, or the intensity until the patient gets to that 6 out of 7. And that's where you take it. And they do multiple presentations. And then they kind of just make a contour line of where the patient is plotting how loud that sound is across different frequencies. I think speech tends to be more of just this is where it's at. And so that's not necessarily the method I was taught. So I was curious to see what else has been out there or what is used in practice. Is it still used in practice? Because the contour test has been around since 97. But I did find in about 2005, a group, Punch et al., they were looking at how people are collecting LDLs, and they really researched and found that at that time, they just needed to have a standardized model, as we don't necessarily have one. And I'm kind of curious if that has really changed. And what they also found in their research is that the loudness levels really can be influenced by how we instruct our patients and how we get them. Are we doing a descending order? Or are we using speech? Are we using pure tones? So that's kind of what made me look at this and go, what's out there? What are audiologists doing? And what's probably best practice and most appropriate?
Yeah. And then, so I wanted Dr. Galloway to go first and talk about how she obtains UCLs or LDLs, and then also kind of tie in what you do for mapping with cochlear implants, and how sometimes the UCLs, and may or may not affect cochlear implants and how you're programming them. And then I'll come in and talk a little bit more about my methods and then what I use for the sound sensitivity patients.
Yes. So I don't necessarily routinely measure loudness discomfort levels, but when I do measure them, the way that I have measured them in the booth is to do kind of that ascending presentation. And actually, it's similar to the Cox contour test, except I didn't know it was called that. I didn't know that's what I was doing. But yes, ascending at a few different frequencies, usually at least a high and a low, but I would probably do 4 frequencies just to kind of have a good look at it, and then make that little, contour line to kind of know where we're at. The way it comes up most for me is that Natalie sees patients for tinnitus, sound sensitivity, hyperacusis, misophonia. And so some of those patients, when you're trying to determine, is this just a typical hearing aid patient, or are we dealing with like some actual sound sensitivity? That is one way that I'm kind of trying to decide what we need to do first. Like, do we need to send them over to her to have a consultation about sound sensitivity, or is this just kind of more run of the mill? And, we're going to be able to just start with hearing aids and probably not have as many issues. So that's how I would measure them in the booth. With cochlear implant patients, we do talk about loudness, discomfort levels, and we use more of a scale. I have one.
Oh, I found it.
Oh, nice. So that's one of them. And essentially you see the loudest or the most red bar. It has a stop sign underneath it. And the words that they use to describe it matters, because it influences a patient's sort of decision. And so you can see there, we've got soft, comfortable, loud but comfortable, or too loud. And with a cochlear implant, we are trying to get to that loud but comfortable, bordering on the too loud level. One, because the patient population has had reduced amplification or reduced sound. And so we're kind of trying to get them back used to that. If you have been living in a very quiet world and someone makes a loud sound, you might just point to too loud instantly because you haven't had a lot of loud sound. And so some of it is kind of counseling too, and talking to the patient. What does loud but comfortable mean? Or what does too loud mean? Same for when you're measuring in the booth. I know I use the phrase physically uncomfortable. Like, you are physically uncomfortable. That is your loudness discomfort level. So that's kind of how I measure them. But typically I am using more of the chart with the cochlear implant patients and kind of using that to my own understanding of what they're getting or how they're perceiving the sound that they are getting.
Yeah. And I think it's important to add to, like, with this scale for cochlear implants, that telling them that loud doesn't necessarily mean that it's better, because we're talking about electrical stimulation. So that comes into play a little bit, and it's just a little bit different. But we're kind of making sure that, when I do cochlear implants, like, they're not getting an eye twitch or something crazy like that,
Yes.
So that's a little bit different with cochlear implants, but love that loudness scale. And then when I was trained to do sound sensitivity patients, very similar loudness scale. It's just a little bit different. There's I think the one that we showed you had about 5 different categories, and the one that I use for sound sensitivity patients probably has about 8 different categories, 8 or 9 different categories of, where it's comfortable, where it's too soft, and then where it gets to be whatever the terms you're going to use of like physically, uncomfortable or whatever it is. And so for me, I use a loudness scale when I'm measuring sound sensitivity patients. But if I'm doing it quickly, also, I've got another method that I use that I had talked to Rebecca about that's a lot faster. And so sometimes, like when they're not in for a sound sensitivity consult, but they're here for a hearing test, and I'm like, you were jumping when we were doing acoustic reflexes. So let me try to just run this really quickly and see. And I might not do all the frequencies. I might just do 4 on each side. But I do a little bit faster kind of check or screen that I guess that I'm doing. And it's literally having them, I still use a pulsing tone. And so we use pulsing tones when we test for hearing for threshold. But then I say, so you're going to be listening to those same types of tones again. And what I want you to do this time with the button, instead of just pushing it every time you think you hear it, when they're very soft, these are going to start to get louder. And when it starts to get loud for you, I want you to just push it quickly, like how you have been pushing it. And then I'm going to get louder and louder. And as it gets to be where it's uncomfortable for you, I want you to hold that button down for a few seconds and then release, so that I know when the mark is of when it's starting to get loud and then when it's uncomfortable for them. And so that's a really quick way of testing to see if they've got any sound sensitivity that I might need to just take some time to look at. Or maybe we use it, and I'm not going to give it away, in how we use different loudness discomfort levels in our fittings. But that's a way that I do it that's really quick, just kind of using the button again, but just instructing them. And it's quicker than kind of looking at those 8 different categories, because I tell you, give them more categories and you give them more choices, they're going to sit longer and go, oh yeah, I'm not too sure, like maybe it's here, maybe it's there. And it takes a little bit longer. So that's kind of how I do that in measuring it. So we wanted to kind of go over, why is it important for audiologists to measure uncomfortable levels or loudness discomfort levels, and how do patients benefit from this measurement? So I'm going to have Rebecca start us off with that.
Yeah, I'm kind of going to go back to patient X, so to speak. We had this patient come in, and as I mentioned earlier, they are on the least amount of gain that they can get to give them some audibility. Ideally, we want to give them as much gain as they need to meet those targets and give them the maximum audibility that their hearing loss will allow. But currently, this patient is just having difficulty on the lowest setting. And so went ahead and performed some UCLs, and then came up and saw that there was an extreme limitation to the dynamic range, which is their threshold level, with where it's just too uncomfortably loud, or that UCL, especially at the higher frequencies, which is where a lot of our speech clarity comes from, or distinguishing what we want to hear in noise comes from. So once I went ahead and added that into the audiogram and put it into the software and just kind of refit a few things for this patient, we were able to get them up to experience level 2. And they had been previously turning down the volume at least 2 clicks in the app, as they have volume control. And we reset to 0 and kind of looked at, okay, how is the environment sounding now? And it was already tolerable. So that kind of spurred me on to think, how important, we talk about how important measuring UCLs and using them in fittings are, but in the same vein as we do real ear measurements, because we know that hearing aids set prescriptive targets based on the audiogram we have, but those targets are also based on a coupler and not the individual patient's ear canal, which can increase the gain or have reduced gain depending on the size of the person's individual canal. So if we're doing target fitting based with REM, or real ear measurements, why wouldn't we also want to include UCLs to give a practical, to measure what is their loudness discomfort, not based on a coupler's formula, but based on their actual ear canal resonance. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I felt that it was important for this patient in particular, because they are sensitive to those extremely loud sounds, and they really do have that dynamically reduced range, especially for high frequencies. So I'm curious to see, as we continue to follow up with them, and see how much more benefit things are happening, and are things clearer for them now and much more tolerable. And really the idea behind that is, if patients are just uncomfortable wearing their hearing aids, they're going to take them off and put them in a drawer, or they're not going to be wearing them as long. And I kind of use the phrase, giving them more gain the right way. So we're giving that patient access to more sound in a comfortable way that's going to be usable for them. And so for me, I think going forward, and my best practice will be to get UCL measurements. It takes just a few extra seconds, and have a better fit for my patients going forward. So that's kind of where I landed with this one, and I'm looking forward to kind of following up with them as we go forward.
Well, and I think too that the counseling, just sort of addressing it with them and talking about, okay, we're on this, low level of amplification, but I can tell that, there's some sounds that are uncomfortable for you. I think the counseling helps too, because it kind of explains to them, how are we changing this and why? From a scientist's perspective, I would really love to see the real ear on the experience level 1 without UCLs entered versus the real ear with the UCLs entered on experience level 2. Because I do wonder if the compression ratios, like depending on where those are set, I'd be interested to analyze that, because I do think that there's room for error if somebody doesn't understand the test, right? Like they're reporting that their loudness discomfort levels are lower than they actually are, how that could negatively influence a fitting. But I think especially for this type of patient, and I actually worked with this patient with Rebecca, so we're kind of, we've seen this person together. I know that just that extra bit of time and talking about it, and why are we doing this, and why do we keep coming back and testing different things and measuring different things, is really encouraging, and that, well, we're not just throwing a whole bunch more at you, we're doing it in a way that's kind of tailored to your responses. And I think that instills confidence in the patient too, because they're like, oh, okay, well, she's going to do something totally different with this. But I would like to see how exactly, like if we took an Oticon hearing aid or, Phonak, whatever, and reviewed, I'd be interested to see what it's doing with the compression. And I think we could look up this patient and like her pre-fitting before we did that, and then after, and kind of look at how the compression ratios changed. But I think that sometimes the counseling can go a really long way too. And like, this is what I'm measuring and this is what I'm changing. And we may be tipped off that it's this type of patient when we're doing the hearing test, because we've all been there when they don't hear it, they don't hear it, they don't hear it. That is way too loud. So there's 0 decibels between where they hear it and where it is uncomfortably loud. And, it's like the patients that you saw them jump, when they were doing the acoustic reflexes or something. But sometimes we can kind of like revisit that in the actual audiogram, like, hey, I noticed that, you either didn't hear it or it was too loud. And so that might be a patient that I, send over to Natalie for like a consultation, if that's kind of where we're at. But I'm interested to look at it from like a data perspective too, and see like what it's changing. That's just me being a nerd though.
Well, and also like for people to understand that what you just described too, like there is 0 decibel difference from, oh yeah, it's comfortable, to, oh my gosh, that hurts. Like that actually has a term. It's called recruitment. And so as audiologists, like we have to make sure that we keep track and we understand that too in fitting hearing aids, or if there's something that we can do, which leads me to explain how patients benefit when I measure UCLs and LDLs for my sound sensitivity patients. And so, when we look at a hearing test, we're looking at across the horizontal plane, it would be pitches, so low pitches to high pitches. And then on the vertical plane is going to be decibels or loudness. And so, 20 decibels and softer would be normal hearing. If we did a hearing test and you said, yes, I hear it at that certain level. And then normal conversational speech, pretty much for everyone except for audiologists, probably it's about 50 decibels or so of normal conversation. And I joke because I feel like audiologists, like we talk a lot louder. So we're probably just a little bit higher than 50 decibels, but that's where it is about 50 to 60 decibels is normal conversation. Now, when I'm looking at patients that have hyperacusis, they can't tolerate anything over 70 decibels. So like if I were to raise my voice, I probably could reach close to 70 decibels. And even when I get excited, it probably reaches there, because I do have people that come in and say, oh my gosh, you need to speak a lot softer. And these are my sound tolerance patients, right? Or sound sensitivity patients. And so anything less than 70 decibels ends up being hyperacusis. Then, as we're doing loudness discomfort levels, and maybe they are saying, yes, that's too loud, anywhere between 70 to 90 decibels, they end up being my decreased sound tolerance patients. So not necessarily hyperacusis, but not normal either. Mm-hmm. And then over 90 decibels, anybody that can tolerate beeps or sounds over 90 decibels is considered normal sound tolerance. And so that's kind of how I categorize it, as on the decibel level, right? Or the vertical axis that we're looking at. And besides that, if I can tell whether you have decreased sound tolerance or hyperacusis, the pattern of your loudness discomfort levels tells me something. So whether it matches with your hearing loss or whether it's straight across, it can tell me the difference between whether or not you have hyperacusis or misophonia, which is another type of sound sensitivity issue. And so it's really important, we've talked about recruitment, we've talked about hyperacusis, decreased sound tolerance. It's really important to try to figure out not just, oh, they have sound tolerance issues, I won't be able to fit them with a hearing aid, or maybe I'll just like drop the ceiling, the MPO is what we call it, and they'll be fine. That's not necessarily true. And so it's really important, for us as audiologists to, if we need to, like, I don't do it on a regular basis. So I'm saying, that we're not doing this on a regular basis. But if you're watching this and you're a patient, this is the takeaway. This is the thing that Rebecca had talked about, and why we wanted to talk about this today is it's not talked about a lot unless you're doing sound sensitivity issues. You really don't do this on a regular basis, even less than what we're doing, right? Because we do sound sensitivity patients. We do real ear, and we are looking at how are we going to fit our patients better with hearing aids. And so the takeaway is, if you're a patient and you're noticing that you have a little bit of sound tolerance issues, like, ask your audiologist to measure this. Because as we've talked about earlier today, that it does not take very long, and there's different methods that we can use, and audiologists should know, okay, yep, I got it. Let me just run this really quick, just to kind of rule out certain things, whether it's recruitment, decreased sound tolerance, hyperacusis, misophonia, whatever it is. But we think it's really important for us to dedicate a show to. It was something that Rebecca had brought to our attention, had questions about. So we decided to talk about it. So again, if you're an audiologist, just kind of a reminder, because we're kind of sending patients your way to now ask for this to be measured. So be ready. But then also, if you're a patient, you're noticing that you're having these issues as well, whether it's with your hearing aids or on a daily basis and you don't wear hearing aids at all, it's also really important, and it's super easy to get measured. And so our takeaway for the show today is ask your audiologist to see if you can be measured for this, because it's going to be helpful for you. Anything else that you guys want to add?
I'll just throw in the 2 cents about real ear. That's also really important. And so we are doing that here with all of our patients, but sometimes we've had people come in and they're just have been unhappy since they got them, and they just felt like it hasn't been right. And, measuring the LDLs might help too, if they are somebody that's experiencing some sound discomfort. But ultimately, we don't know what that hearing aid is doing in your ear if we didn't check. So right. I'll put that out there, because sometimes that's just the one thing that got missed, and we didn't expect you had such crazy resonance in your ear canal.
And if you're watching this and you're a grad student, we just gave you an idea for a research study too. Dr. Galloway had mentioned. So if you missed it, go back and watch this episode, because it's a great idea for you to do your research project on. So with that, we will be back next week. Thank you guys for tuning in, and share this out.
Thank you.